All right, welcome back for lunch. If you weren't here this morning, I'm Lisa Mandle, Co-Executive Director of the Natural Capital Alliance. Welcome to this session on the People, Planet, Prosperity Project, or 3Ps Project, Country Applications of Natural Capital in Policy and Planning. Unlike the morning sessions, we're all in plenary. If this is not the session, I hope this is the session you want to be in. We welcome everybody. If you were expecting to be in a different session, there are a couple of concurrent sessions which will be down the hall in the Fisher Conference Center. But I hope you'll stay. So we're thrilled to be marking the culmination of the 3Ps project in person in this way. This session is going to provide a practical look at what it means to use natural capital approaches to bring natural capital information into policy and planning. It's a chance to share lessons learned and experiences and stories and answer some of the questions we were talking about in the morning panel about what does success look like and how do we overcome challenges. So I'll provide a brief introduction, and then we have actually two panel sessions. So I'll quickly turn things over to the panel to get into the really exciting parts. So we've mentioned the 3Ps project a number of times. The goal is to mainstream nature in policy and finance decisions. This has been a real collaboration across multiple multilateral development banks and a number of funders to make this project a reality. I know I and many others have been talking about natural capital approaches a bunch of times. I don't think we've really defined that term yet. For folks who aren't already familiar with it, when we're talking about natural capital approaches, we're talking about modeling and mapping and quantifying benefits that nature provides to people and incorporating those values into policy and investment decisions in order to achieve better outcomes for people and nature together. So this goal of benefiting people and benefiting nature, and recognizing those links between the two. The 3Ps project really aimed to co-develop these natural capital approaches with collaborators from country governments and from these multilateral development banks in order to drive new policy and finance decisions and to develop capacity within countries and within institutions for long-term systemic change. And the ambition was not just to drive that change within the countries where we were working, but really to be able to scale that by sharing lessons learned for governments, for development banks and financial institutions to be able to replicate this approach in countries around the world. Mary showed this slide before, so I won't go into details, but just to say that across the 16 countries where we worked, there were 16 kind of different flavors of natural capital approaches. And I think a main takeaway here is that natural capital approaches can enter into decision-making processes across a whole spectrum, everywhere from initial planning and developing strategies, all the way through to implementation, to then monitoring and reporting and verification. So there's no one wrong way to get started, and many, many ways to advance this work. So on the panel, on this session today, you'll hear from 10 of the 16 representatives from 10 of the 16 countries where we have been implementing these approaches, covering the Inter-American Development Bank pilot countries in the LAC, Latin America and Caribbean region, and the pilots done in collaboration with the Asian Development Bank in the Asia Pacific region. And I think a few key things few key messages I think that we'll hear from this panel are that, one, natural capital approaches, as I said before, can support multiple phases of decision making, and that these approaches are really most impactful when they're designed to answer questions, the needs of decision makers, the questions decision makers have. And that the data and the numbers and the maps are really important, but on their own, they only go so far, and the real change and transformation happens when these approaches are embedded within institutions. So we'll hear from speakers in two panels. The first panel, which will be moderated by my colleague Duval Jaguno from the Inter-American Development Bank, is focused on zoning, compensation, and planning. And then we'll have a second panel moderated by my colleague, Natural Capital Alliance Senior Scientist Hector Angarita on finance and natural capital. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Deval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and congratulations for this the NatCap symposium. And this panel will be bilingual in Spanish and English. And some of the presentation could be in Spanish, some could be in English. Buenas tardes con todos. Este panel va a ser en español y en inglés. Y muchas gracias por su participación. The panel one will focus in how apply natural capital assessment in zoning, compensation, and planning decisions. I introduce each speaker just before they present. The first speaker is from Chile. He is Álvaro Chi. Álvaro is an economist and Chile Minister of Environment, and he has a central role in developing the country's natural capital accounting framework. And he is integrating ecosystem system into territorial planning and biodiversity policy. And he will talk about the pilot project in Rio Bueno Basin. And go ahead, Álvaro, and expect you and the impact of this pilot project in legislation in Chile too, by the biodiversity law implementation. Thank you very much, and very welcome, Álvaro.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here to present contributions of natural capital approaches to the implementation of public policies in Chile, the case of Rio Bueno Basin. What is the pilot project about? In Chile, the pilot focused on supporting the implementation of a new public policy, about biodiversity policy, through a practical application of natural capital approaches in the Rio Bueno Basin. This decision was made by the Natural Capital Committee because this territory has a lot of variety of ecosystem services, beneficiaries, and including local communities and indigenous people as well. The core focus is operationalized the biodiversity offset instrument under Chile's new Biodiversity and Protected Area Service, the SBAP, to compensate residual environmental impacts. The methodology combined ecosystem services assessment, natural capital evaluation, and policy analysis. The key products included delivered decision support tools, such as ecosystem services maps, economic maps, regulatory criteria maps, and altogether had to develop a portfolio of preferred restoration areas. It has a strategic goal, design pilot insights to guide broader policy integration across biodiversity, water, and development agendas. The role of natural capital information included spatial modeling and data integration. We developed ecosystem mapping to generate spatial data for 6 key ecosystem services, including water, sediment, nutrients, carbon, habitat, and recreation, economic evaluation of those ecosystem services, and a regulatory alignment translated by Chile's biodiversity offset regulation criteria into functional spatial layers. Altogether, combined these layers to target priority areas where biodiversity benefits, ecosystem services co-benefits, economic opportunities, and regulatory priorities converge. What it influenced, by bringing all this information together, helped identify preferred restoration areas where multiple objectives converge. These areas represent locations where biodiversity offset actions have the potential to generate biodiversity gains while also delivering ecosystem service benefits and social co-benefits. The pilot therefore provided a transparent and evidence-based approach for supporting the implementation of the biodiversity offsets instrument and demonstrated a key element, that how natural capital approaches can strengthen the coherence, traceability, and effectiveness of environmental decision-making. Open questions. One of the key questions moving forward is how to translate this pilot results into an operational decision support process that can be systematically adopted by public institutions. While the pilot demonstrated the value of integrating ecological, economic, and regulatory information, an important next step is understanding how these approaches can be embedded into institutional process in a long-term work and scaled across different territories and policy instruments. And that is precisely the next steps for the new project. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Álvaro. Thank you very much, Álvaro. The next presenter is Jade de la Buz. Jade is a senior scientist at Seascape Solutions and a senior fellow at Natural Capital Alliance. She has more than 15 years of experience in natural capital approach. Jade worked in Belize. She is part of the famous case pilot project in Belize. As well, the Cook Islands focuses in Marilagun, Watershed. And today, she is not presenting about Belize. She is presenting about Cook Island pilot project. Welcome, Jade.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all here, some familiar faces and new ones. So today, talking about the Cook Islands, that was one of the 16 countries we worked in as part of the 3P project. In the Cook Islands was, I guess if I were to put things along a spectrum, we talked about Belize that has over a decade of experience doing those things. Cook Islands was kind of like a first timer on like integrating natural capital approaches in their decisions. That is not to say that in their culture, nature is part of their daily lives. So sometimes there's language, but there's also culture that can show that natural capital, they just call it differently, is also important. So when we got together, they wanted us to focus on part of the main island, which is called the Muri Lagoon, which is also known as the Golden Stretch. Why? Because 75% of their tourism goes through this area to enjoy nature, stay in nice coastal hotels. And it's also one of the areas where water is safe for local children to go play and recreate. The challenge is that when there's big development happening around tourism, so did the watersheds get altered, which resulted in more flooding risk coming from the watersheds, more land-based source pollution that ended up turning the lagoon into an algae soup. That made it on TripAdvisor, and that got the attention of ADB, that got the attention of the local government of like, how do we restore this land-sea integrated management system, which is how things were done traditionally. So an integrated team got together. We had the ADB joining the team, the Minister of Finance, the Ministry of Environment, and local chief leaders from the Muri Lagoon area. We got together to diagnose the problem and the priorities, and what they wanted was use this natural capital assessment framework for one, put everybody on the same page. When you have maps that shows what's going on in a holistic way, all the way from the summit of the mountains to the lagoon, it kind of takes away the argument of like what's going wrong and brings everybody together to find a solution. Over there as well, it's a different land tenure system. The government doesn't get to tell people what to do on their land. The local chief holders are the ones who decide. And so what the government saw in the value of these approaches is that it could help create incentivized landowners to also change their practices. The other piece of why they wanted to do this kind of work was also to bring co-financing and develop finance mechanisms. One, to help fund a wastewater treatment plant that ADB is co-financing. And the other one was also to help bring resources for local grassroots NGOs who wanted to restore the river systems. And so we got together around tables with pen and colors and maps, and we just started drawing things to see where do we do things and how. And then we had our team take this information, put it into GIS, into invest models to look at, okay, if we were to envision this future, how would it change sediment runoff, nutrient runoff, and flood risk? We got some good results that showed that bringing back the riparian buffers could reduce sediment runoff by over 50%. We also found that building green spaces along the watershed length could help reduce flooding risk. And we also saw that the wastewater treatment plant could reduce nutrient runoff by over 90%. And so this information was taken a bit further because that was telling us what's the potential trade-offs that we're making by changing landscape practices. And the ADB economy team did an economic valuation of like, who would be willing to pay and how much to make those things come to life. And we found they did the survey with residents and tourists, and they were able to find out that both of them were willing to pay a one-off donation of over $300 to bring back water quality to its highest standards. And so today this information is being used to help bring co-financing. It's also these approaches are being taken up by the government and replicated in other watersheds under Jeff 7, 8, 9. Sorry, I can't keep track of all these Jeff grant rounds. But just to show you that we're starting small with a pilot, we were able to have something that rippled out across the island and into the regional space as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jared. The next presenter is from Uruguay. Is Verónica Piñeiro. Verónica is the National Director of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service at Minister of Environment. She has a large background in environmental governance and national and municipal levels. She is a biologist, and she has a master's degree in agricultural science from the University of the Republic. Welcome, Verónica.
Hi, good morning. Everyone, it's a pleasure to share Uruguay experience using natural capital assessment to support wetland conservation in Uruguay. Our pilot project focused on generating scientific evidence to inform implementation of Uruguay's wetland protection policy through a natural capital assessment. Wetlands cover around 12% of Uruguay's territory and are distributed around the entire country. They provide essential benefits to both nature and people, including carbon storage, flood regulation, water supply, and coastal protection. Despite their importance, wetlands have historically been viewed as a land available for agricultural extension, infrastructure, and urban development, leading to widespread drainage and degradation. Again, this background, our objective was not only to generate new information, but also to strengthen technical capacity within government, improve coordination across institutions, and promote innovation in environmental policy. The project was implemented over 1 year by a multidisciplinary team composed of government staff and local consultants, working closely with senior government officials, the IDB, and the Natural Capital Project. To assess ecosystem service, we used the INVEST modeling platform developed by the Natural Capital Project. This allowed us to map and quantify 4 key ecosystem services: carbon storage, flood mitigation, water supply, and coastal protection. The analyses were conducted at different spatial scales depending on the policy questions and the availability of data. Carbon storage was assessed nationwide, coastal protection along Uruguay's coastline, and flood mitigation and water supply across the country's 4 main river basins. We then combine this spatial analysis with both monetary and non-monetary valuation methods to better capture the benefit wetlands provide to society. So, how this information influence decision-making? Recently, Uruguay approved an amendment to its water code establishing legal protection for wetlands of environmental importance. Under this regulation, drainage and other activities that degrade the wetlands are prohibited. Initially, environmental importance wetlands were identified using ecological criteria such as size, biodiversity, and proximity to urban areas. Our natural capital assessment complemented this process by identifying those wetlands that also provide the greatest benefits to society through ecosystem service. As a result, the assessment provides an evidence base for implementing and monitoring the new regulation, while also supporting future land use planning and the development of additional policy instruments for wetlands, both inside and outside the currently protected areas. And let me finish one result that illustrates why this work matters. Considering only 3 ecosystem services, carbon storage, flood mitigation, and water supply, the annual value generated by 1 hectare of wetland is approximately 3 times higher than the market rental value of agricultural land in Uruguay. We also found that wetlands currently protect 8% of Uruguay's coastal population from coastal hazard, and under future climate change scenarios, this figure could increase to 19%. These findings help demonstrate that the conserving wetlands is not only an environmental policy, it's also a sound economic investment and a key strategy for building resilience to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. The next presenter is from my own country, Ecuador. Francisco Lopez. Francisco Lopez is the Undersecretary of the Macroeconomic Management at the Minister of Finance in Ecuador. He worked previously in the Central Bank of Ecuador and the National Secretary of Planning and Development. He is an economist from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Ecuador, and he has a master's degree from the University of Barcelona. He will present our pilot project in Yasuní Biosphere Reserve in the Amazon region in Ecuador. Thank you very much, and welcome, Francisco.
Thank you very much, Duval. I will be the first that present or make his presentation in Spanish, so I'm glad to see the first one. Muy buenas tardes con todos. Voy a presentar el proyecto piloto de la valoración de capital natural en la Reserva de Biosfera del Yasuní. Ecuador es uno de los países más biodiversos del mundo y esto se ve establecido porque cuenta con más de 7 reservas de biosfera aprobadas por la UNESCO, una de las cuales, y la creo que más mundialmente conocida, es la Reserva del Yasuní, por lo cual este proyecto piloto se genera o pretende generar evidencia de capital natural para informar decisiones de conservación y planificación territorial. La Reserva de Biosfera del Yasuní cuenta con aproximadamente 27,000 kilómetros cuadrados de extensión y en la cual se encuentra el Parque Nacional Yasuní dentro de su núcleo. Esto es importante también notar porque dentro de este ámbito, de esta geografía, se encuentra más del 40% de la producción petrolera nacional y adicionalmente es uno de los territorios más deforestados, con datos al 2024 de más de 18,000 hectáreas deforestadas en esto. Es importante mencionar también que dentro del ámbito geográfico donde se encuentra la reserva se realizó el biocorredor amazónico, que fue el canje de deuda más grande del mundo por naturaleza en 2024, el cual liberó fondos de $460 millones para capital natural en los próximos 17 años. Y dentro de este territorio se encuentran pueblos indígenas como guaraníes, tagaeris, taromenanis, quichuas y zaparas, los cuales aún no han sido contactados y adicionalmente se encuentra con presiones entre las cuales se encuentra deforestación, minería ilegal y expansión agrícola a gran escala, así como también la producción petrolera. Es importante que esta estructura de proyecto piloto nos permitió que el ejercicio técnico no quedara aislado, ya que también utiliza colaboradores financieros como el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, el Banco Mundial, el Natural Capital Alliance, implementados por el sector privado como ATUC, que aquí tienen los representantes, y con la revisión y validación del sector público desde el Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas, el Ministerio de Ambiente y Energía e INABIO, que es la Institución Nacional de Biodiversidad, el Instituto Nacional de Biodiversidad. El alcance metodológico de este piloto utiliza evaluación de los servicios ecosistémicos, la valoración del capital natural y el análisis de instrumentos de política para a través de estos llegar al mapeo de actores y beneficiarios, generar mapas de oferta y servicios priorizados y un portafolio priorizado de áreas para utilizar estos insumos tanto espaciales y cuantitativos para generar recomendaciones de política pública, pero también inversión privada. Los servicios ecosistémicos modelados, modelaron 7 diferentes servicios ecosistémicos con la herramienta Invest, tomando como línea base el año 2024 y analizando la disponibilidad de agua, la retención de sedimentos, la calidad de hábitat, la calidad de agua, el carbono almacenado, el turismo y recreación y la contaminación hidrocarburífera, que es algo pionero en este tipo de análisis. Esta línea base se la compara entre 2 escenarios, el escenario de business as usual, que utiliza una deforestación proyectada del 80% de probabilidad, y la conservación sostenible al 2030 con un escenario positivo de gestión sostenible del paisaje. Los resultados de este proyecto específicamente es generar la valoración anual estimada de tener el almacenamiento de carbono de más de $1,000 millones anuales. En ámbitos de turismo y recreación, más de 17 millones anuales se puede también lograr como un beneficio neto entre los gastos esperados con los beneficios asociados a esto. En calidad de agua, 131 millones de dólares y en erosión del suelo evitada son $83,000. Pero si tomamos todo el ámbito del área de moderación, que es más grande inclusive que la reserva de la biosfera, esto puede llegar a más de $1 millón también. En la optimización espacial no solo se generó los resultados o los resultados valorados, sino también se generó con el algoritmo ROOT, se identificaron áreas prioritarias de los 3 tipos de intervención, tanto de prevención, restauración y preservación, con lo cual se emitieron o se plantean emitir recomendaciones de política e inversión como generar políticas para la Estrategia Nacional de Biodiversidad y su plan de acción, el plan de gestión de la reserva de la biosfera del Yasuní y el biocorredor amazónico apalancando bancabilidad en los proyectos de inversión que pueden establecerse en la misma. La meta es crear un lenguaje común entre los instrumentos que normalmente operan por separado y de esta manera generar inversiones también dentro de este ámbito. Con esto termino y solo les dejo un mensaje final en el cual lo que todavía no resolvemos del todo es la interdependencia que existe entre las cuencas altas andinas y la reserva. Esto se decide fuera del núcleo protegido del Yasuní y que afecta directamente estos servicios ecosistémicos. Entonces, la pregunta a responder es cómo podríamos construir desde el ámbito de la política pública dentro de nuestra estructura institucional una coordinación multinivel bajo una lógica que no solo vea las áreas específicas, sino que vea todo el spillover que puede existir en el ámbito fuera de las mismas. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Francisco. Quisiera simplemente resaltar que en Ecuador es donde se han realizado 2 conversiones de deuda por naturaleza, una en Galápagos y otra en el biocorredor amazónico, a la cual hizo referencia Francisco, y además mencionar que esto tiene relación con una de las láminas que presentó el representante del Banco Asiático de Infraestructura que habló de los ríos voladores, de flying rivers. This is part, the Yasuní Bioreserve is part of the flying rivers in the Amazonian region. Thank you very much, Francisco. The next presenter is Narayan Iyer. Narayan Iyer is the principal natural resource and agricultural specialist at the ASEAN Development Banks. He leads the development of a regional natural capital lab and concessional natural capital funds. He works in many projects across Asia Pacific, including Sri Lanka and Armenia. He is going to present two pilot projects in Sri Lanka and Armenia. Thank you very much, and welcome, Narayan.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, and thanks for the introduction, and thanks for tolerating me for a second time. But I will be back, I threaten you. I made some slides, but I think I'll only show one slide on Sri Lanka. And Armenia, I'll probably just talk through. I think by now the audience is kind of aware of what the pilot assessments in general were about. So I'm not going to dwell specifically on the concept, but I'll directly dive into Sri Lanka. I haven't put a map of Sri Lanka here. In retrospect, I think I should have. So it's the pearl of the Indian Ocean. It's, you know, an island that is shaped like a pearl, which is why it's called Pearl of the Indian Ocean. And the southern part of Sri Lanka is where its water resides. And, you know, Sri Lanka gets rainfall mainly through the southwest monsoon and a little bit of the receding monsoon as well, but mainly southwest. And the way the terrain is and the way the climate, you know, is, most of the rainfall is, you know, coming down from the south, and as the clouds go over the north, it just doesn't rain. So the northern part is fairly dry and is scarce, it's water scarce, whereas the southern part has excess water. So we've been helping, you know, the government to figure out how to, you know, use the excess water in the south, in the north. And we've helped them set up irrigation projects that can take water from the excess in the south and deliver it to the north. Now, the problems, there are obviously, you know, issues with every project. With this project as well, we found that over a period of time, there is a reduction in the amount of water that is, you know, going through from south to north. And the risk of, you know, that continuing to happen was, of course, significant. And we also, you know, in our plan, had a phase 2 of this project where we would enhance the irrigation capacities as the, you know, country grows and as the population in the north also grows. So which meant that any fresh investment that, you know, both the government and ADB would make was subject to the same risk and perhaps, you know, higher degree of risk. And we thought that, you know, we would use this pilot to demonstrate how a project could be designed to, you know, use data, use analytics to reduce risks, and maybe also inform ways of, you know, how you can mitigate that risk. Okay, so I'm being asked to leave. So I've taken a little bit of time to explain the context because I think that's important. You know, otherwise it's very easy to say, okay, I have these invest models, I have models for, you know, SDR, I have models for tourism, I have models for whatever else, and then, you know, there's some input and there's some output, but if you understand the context, it helps to. So what we did here was we applied invest models. We applied this, you know, sediment delivery ratio models, primarily to figure out, you know, the sedimentation and the, you know, soil erosion that was causing the sedimentation in the, you know, irrigation pipes, and also some of the, you know, watersheds. There where sedimentation was reducing the storage capacity of. So the idea was to figure that out and also look at potential solutions. The solution that we examined, and it's not the only solution, but the solution we examined was, you know, how, see, Sri Lanka has a lot of tea that's grown. And that part of Sri Lanka also has a significant amount of tea gardens. So we examined conversion of some of the tea gardens into forest land, grow more vegetation so that the erosion of soil is reduced. And we applied, the optimization models, the route optimization to evaluate different scenarios. For instance, what if you convert all the tea, growing areas into forests? Or what if you convert only, part of it into forest? Or what if you don't convert any? And you have costs and benefits in all these scenarios. And, the pilot recommended a particular scenario, obviously somewhere in between. The one unique thing about this pilot was the involvement of, the local stakeholders, both local researchers, local academicians, local government in this process. And we also undertook a training of, you could say, training the trainers, so that they could, go out and advocate for these kind of approaches to better inform, projects in the country. We relied initially on global data for these models. There was some amount of, I think, tweaking for local, but during the training of trainers, it was quite clear to everyone that you need more local data. And bringing together all the local stakeholders also makes it easier for, for the pilot, for the analytics. Access to local data becomes much easier when people locally are convinced. It's not that data cannot be collected, just that people are not convinced about the importance of doing that. Let me stop here. I think I have run out of time for Armenia, but if you give me 1 minute, okay. I'll just, quickly, I'll just kind of just state what we did there. So Armenia has 6 major river basins. We selected one of those river basins called Ararat River Basin. Every river basin has a river basin management plan. And these plans are updated every 5 years. And they have their own staggered schedule. So it's not that every river basin is doing it at the same time. So when we were planning this pilot, there were 3 river basins that we could have gone with. We chose the Ararat River Basin because that's a significant one. That's where the capital Yerevan is. It contributes to 30% of the country's GDP. So we went to the government and we agreed with them that we would, look at assessments, assessments of the ecosystems there to figure out the contribution of these ecosystems to that, to the Ararat River. How they impact the quality of water, how they impact the flow of water, which are the specific ecosystems that are important, what is the relative importance. Sorry, Tom, at the risk of, being waylaid outside at night, I'm going to take a few more seconds. So our assessment, also valued that river basin. I mean, it was some of the values of the ecosystems there, of the benefits. And we wrote one chapter of the updated river basin management plan, which dealt with the contribution of natural capital in that river basin to the river's flow and quality. Some of the major stakeholders that benefited from this were, the energy producers, the farmers, the fisher folk. And that river basin management plan is being adopted. And we are hopeful that there will be action at a later stage on this, which can lead to maybe potential investments to de-risk the flow of the river. Incidentally, in the Sri Lanka project, we actually approved a $200 million loan in December 2025. And that loan, the design of that was informed to some extent by the analysis that the pilot did. I'll stop here. Tom?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. We have questions for the panelists, and I will short in the questions. And if you want, Álvaro, I will do my question in Spanish for you. Álvaro, basado en la experiencia piloto en Río Bueno, ¿qué recomendaciones específicas tú tendrías para temas relacionados con arreglos institucionales, como el Comité de Capital Natural, que sabemos que existe en Chile, sistemas de información y procesos de toma de decisiones? ¿Cuáles fueron los más críticos para que este proyecto sea exitoso y cuáles son los más críticos para mantener la sostenibilidad y escalabilidad de proyectos pilotos como el que tuvimos en Río Bueno? Adelante, Álvaro, si quieres puedes contestar desde tu propio puesto con el micrófono.
Thank you very much, Duval. I think that the key element in this pilot was start from the beginning all together. Scientists, public policy managers, economists, researchers, and of course the Natural Capital Committee helped to that because that include several ministries regarding environment, finance, economy, and additionally the central bank and a specific scientific organization, the CTCI organization. And so we had all together in the same table. And additionally, we had the support of Stanford and a huge academic team, and additionally some Chilean scientists from universities. So the pilot was designed in order to support a public policy considering this scientific approach. So I think that was the key element, and additionally data, of course, that is another key element, having a very accessible, very updated and useful information for policy and decision making. That is a key element. We had to collect data from different services, and that is a challenge to have all this information in, we hope, in a one window platform. And additionally, the process. I think that taking into consideration all the objectives from different actors, but from the beginning. I think that is a key element.
Thank you very much, Álvaro. Very interesting approach in Chile. Jade, from you, in the Cook Islands, how did the integration of natural capital evidence inform decision-making in a small island context? And what lessons can be applied to strengthen science policy uptake and scaling across other island systems?
Thanks for this question. Yeah. So I think the one way that I see scaling happening is also through kind of like sister initiatives like the UNDP Blue-Green Island program, where they're working with 15 SIDS countries around the world to basically scale these approaches, embed them in policy coherence, and help reform finance mechanisms. So it's nice to see that there's multiple efforts happening from different organizations that all aim towards similar goals.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jay. For Verónica, I will do in Spanish la pregunta. Basados en la experiencia que tuvimos en Uruguay, ¿cuáles fueron los elementos claves para poder transicionar los insumos de ciencia en política pública y en escalar este modelo? ¿Y cuáles son los desafíos que se tienen actualmente en Uruguay?
I turn to Spanish for the question. And, como contaba el colega de Chile, la incorporación de diferentes equipos técnicos desde diferentes lugares, creo que eso le brindó al proyecto la capacidad de poder trasladar desde la ciencia a la política y desde los datos a la política la hacer que este proyecto tuviera más profundidad. El proyecto estuvo implementado con el Ministerio de Ambiente, entre el Ministerio de Ambiente y el Ministerio de Economía, pero se generó un consejo consultivo de seguimiento en el que se incorporaron otros actores gubernamentales importantes, como es los actores de la planificación del ordenamiento territorial y también el área de recursos naturales del Ministerio de Agricultura. Creo que esos dos elementos, ¿no? El haber incorporado desde el inicio tanto a la academia como a otros actores importantes dentro del gobierno, llevó a ese éxito y fueron clave para trasladar esa entre ciencia y definiciones políticas, y creo que algunos de los desafíos que identificó también y que identifica el reporte del proyecto en Uruguay es la disponibilidad de datos y de información desagregada para Uruguay. Muchas veces la información está en un grado tan alto que para Uruguay, siendo un país chico, a veces tiene algunos problemas de aplicación. Una de las cosas que se identifica, por ejemplo, es cómo la dinámica de carbono juega con los humedales, ¿no? Y cómo eso sucede, y otro también es la falta de algunos consensos en Uruguay de cuál es la extensión de los humedales en el territorio uruguayo. Eso depende de las diferentes fuentes que se utilicen, y bueno, lograr abordar esos dos desafíos creo que puede permitir también mejorar un poco el efecto de los resultados del proyecto.
Perfecto, muchísimas gracias, Verónica. Y lo que además junto es que, basado en la experiencia del Comité de Capital Natural en Chile, también se creó el Consejo Consultivo en Uruguay y es una experiencia que ha sido replicable. Para ti, Francisco, basado en la experiencia del Yasuní, ¿cómo es tu influencia en términos de política económica y además de instrumentos de financiamiento en Ecuador? ¿Y cómo esto puede ayudar a mejorar la toma de decisiones del financiamiento en la naturaleza? Adelante, Francisco.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la pregunta. Ecuador en este momento se encuentra liderando el proceso desde el Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas con acompañamiento técnico con el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Estamos en el proceso de generar la taxonomía verde ecuatoriana. En este sentido, primero que todo, es la relevancia de esta taxonomía es que sería la segunda en la región después de Paraguay, que identifica también temas verdes en el tema de gasto público. Con esto lo que se pretende es mitigar problemas de greenwashing, tanto en iniciativas privadas, pero también públicas, y con esto mejorar tanto el aparataje de financiamiento privado como el tema fiscal, que nosotros tenemos una restricción bastante fuerte hablando en cifras macroeconómicas. A partir de esto, este tipo de análisis como la valoración económica del estudio, como en carbono, agua o turismo, y las áreas priorizadas que decantan de este estudio, también pueden apalancarse como posibles procesos de bancabilidad y financiamiento desde el sector privado y público por el canje de deuda por naturaleza del biocorredor amazónico, que como había comentado cuenta con más de 460 millones apalancados a 17 años, lo cual da un promedio de aproximadamente 30 millones al año que pueden ser usados a través de la valoración de capital natural como justificación de bancabilidad de estos proyectos. En el tema de replicabilidad y escalamiento de este tipo de procesos, como les dije, Ecuador tiene, además de la reserva de la biosfera del Yasuní, 6 reservas de biosfera adicionales. Tenemos un sistema nacional de áreas protegidas, tenemos áreas de protección hídrica y territorios indígenas con planes de vida, los cuales pueden ser fácilmente candidatos a recibir este mismo enfoque de diagnóstico y valoración aplicado al Yasuní, lo cual lo dejo aquí como punto de partida para posibles nuevos estudios. Y la idea fuerza es que un diagnóstico de este capital no solo sea un ejercicio académico, sino que también pueda capturar proyectos de conservación concretos al darles una base de bancabilidad y justificación técnica a los financistas. Entonces, creo que con esto también podemos apalancar proyectos o unirnos o conectarnos con otros países pilotos de estos tipos de análisis como Uruguay, Belice y Colombia, abriendo a Ecuador como una narrativa de referente regional en capital natural amazónico.
Muchísimas gracias, Francisco. Y debo mencionar simplemente que el esfuerzo que se han hecho en todos estos países pilotos es del esfuerzo colectivo entre ministerios como de Ambiente, de Economía y Finanzas, y equipos consultores especializados que se han tenido, y obviamente el equipo de Natural Capital Alliance. The final question is for Narayan. Narayan, drawing on the pilots in Sri Lanka and Armenia, which financing models show the greatest potential to mobilize investment, and how can multilateral development banks structure them to enable replication and scaling across many countries?
Okay, I mean, honest answer is neither of these two projects showed any financial, instrument or anything that could readily be available.
Okay.
But in general, what I would like to say is these kind of assessments where we may, be able to come with some kind of valuation, some kind of benefits projections from different ecosystems. These are amenable to design, for example, payment for ecosystem service mechanisms. We have been doing, this in other projects without, having really done this kind of assessments. I mean, you can value, a set of future cash flows, or you can value any asset in any manner. You don't have to do, the assessments of this kind. But if you do, assessments based on data, then you have a lot more confidence in the valuation numbers that you come up with. And you also would have some basis, on the basis of which you could agree with all the stakeholders involved. So, for instance, in the case of Sri Lanka, if we are to have, the solution that was, proposed for the tea gardens, where we proposed that, some proportion of the tea gardens be converted to, say, forests. So that now there is a loss of revenues for the owners of those tea gardens. So how should they be compensated? Doing these kind of valuations, doing these kind of assessments could, form a basis for compensating them. There could be other ways of determining this as well, but this is one way. I mean, you could, you could design, for instance, bonds, or you could design loans where the payment, repayment, part of it, or maybe the coupon, can be, a function of the underlying valuation of, some of these services. If the future values, if you conduct valuation, let's say on an annual basis, and the valuation changes, for instance, then the payments, underlying payments on these instruments could change. So it could be a floating, kind of a floating rate. So,
thank you very much, Nare. Thank you very much for everybody. Thank you very much, Jade. Thank you very much, Alvaro, Veronica, Francisco, and Narayan. You're amazing presenters, and you are amazing showing your project pilots in your countries. This is only 5 of the pilot countries of the 16 around the world with the Natural Capital Alliance. Hector Angarita will be the moderator of the next panel, and Hector he will part of the project pilots in Chile, in Uruguay, and Ecuador too. Hector, you are very welcome to the second panel. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here hosting this second panel. We're going to move now into another element that we have worked in this 3-piece project that is a fundamental part of the innovations that we're trying to drive across different countries, which is how natural capital information enters into finance mechanism and investment decisions. Narayan was just precisely giving us a good segue into this when he was commenting during his answer the possibility to design different types of finance cycles based on this natural capital information. Bonds, payment systems, accounting framework, fiscal instruments. And so the idea is that we're going to have here direct information from 4 countries that develop this type of applications in the 3-piece project. So I'm going to introduce each of the panelists, and for each of them we're going to have like 4 minutes, for a brief presentation, And then we're going to have a few questions. I hope it's going to be a very interesting conversation with all our panelists today here. So first of all, I would like to start with Camilo Diaz from Colombia. Camilo is an economist with over 15 years of experience in natural capital and economic valuation and biodiversity finance, and he's currently consulting for the Inter-American Development Bank in Colombia. He worked for the Colombia's 3P project, also being part of the government in 2024, which produced a biophysical and monetary evaluation of ecosystem services from protected areas, forming the quantitative basis for protected area reform under the new policy of Colombia to strengthen the financing of protected areas and the new climate action law to implement natural capital accounting across the country. So welcome, Camilo.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give the presentation in Spanish. Para mí es un honor venir hoy aquí a presentar los resultados de un proyecto que ya cumple, en nuestro caso en Colombia, 4 años en implementación y con unos resultados que por el título de la presentación podemos ver claramente que es cómo pasamos de la valoración del capital natural al financiamiento de la biodiversidad en nuestro país. ¿Sí? Este ejercicio fue construido con un equipo interdisciplinario entre el Natural Capital Alliance, el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo con su representación en Colombia con el apoyo de Washington y el Departamento Nacional de Planeación, que es el que orienta la política pública en Colombia. Entonces, básicamente en Colombia el proyecto tiene unos resultados, digamos que aquí de manera muy resumida los voy a decir, pero que nos permitió eso que no se permite normalmente en política pública, que es integrar la política de mediano plazo, como el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, con la política de largo plazo, como es el fortalecimiento del Sistema Nacional de Áreas Protegidas. En nuestro caso, el COMPES 4050. Y cómo logramos nosotros, a través de la implementación del Sistema de Contabilidad Económica Ambiental, cómo logramos nosotros precisamente esos cumplimientos de política con la valoración del capital natural, a partir de unos ejercicios robustos de modelación biofísica que se hicieron aquí en el proyecto de capital natural y que íbamos validando en el territorio. Es así que esa modelación biofísica o esos análisis en unidades biofísicas y esa valoración monetaria nos permitió precisamente con la implementación del Sistema de Contabilidad Económica Ambiental, nos permitió concretamente en 2 cuencas 3 valoraciones económicas. ¿Sí? Eso es, creo que es la contundencia que ha tenido este proyecto en Colombia y cómo nos permitió básicamente integrar esos municipios que tienen unas particularidades por sus ingresos altos, por su población, precisamente hacer una estrategia sectorial para, digamos que, poder direccionar recursos hacia las áreas protegidas. Pero lo más importante es poder haber vinculado también la valoración del capital natural, perdón, en la metodología precisamente y del financiamiento, ¿cierto? Que tiene básicamente tres aspectos clave, que es un inventario, una evaluación y una priorización para el país. Es así que se construyen básicamente 2 líneas claras en Colombia, que es la valoración y el uso de la valoración económica en el financiamiento de la biodiversidad basado en una evidencia real. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Camilo. Now I would like to invite Beverly Wade, She's the Chief Executive Officer of Belize Ministry of Blue Economy and Marine Conservation, with over 25 years of experience in fisheries management, marine conservation, sustainable financing, and carbon markets. In the Belize 3Ps pilot, designed KPIs, key performance indicators, covering coastal ecosystem health, fisheries, tourism, and inclusive governance, forming the monitoring, reporting, and verification system underpinning the country's $364 million blue bond and project finance for performance. So welcome, Beverly.
Thank you very much. And I'll try to keep up with the brutal timekeeper. So Belize is a natural, is a nature-based economy. 70% of our GDP is said to be directly linked to nature in Belize. And so for us, we see nature-positive economics as being central to our prosperity and our development. So the 3Ps project for us basically allowed us to actively anchor our sustainable blue economic development in results-based finance. It is helping us develop a set of 34 KPIs covering environmental, economic, and social indicators to explicitly track nature-people connections. So while our historic Blue Bond agreement was successful, unleashing future results-based financing requires scientific proof of progress. And so this pilot for us centralizes our national framework linking ecosystems health directly to socioeconomic outcomes and providing the rigorous foundation which is required for upcoming instruments like our project finance for permanence and future outcome-based financing frameworks. For us, natural capital information has been central to our planning. We are a country that has made its mark really in looking at planning, especially within our blue space. And so we aren't really starting from scratch. We consider ourselves now a proof of concept, which we're very much proud of. We are actually proud that from 2016, we've been using Stanford's Invest and Root tools to model future scenarios and embedding them along with habitat maps and risk into our integrated coastal zone planning. And I'm very happy and pleased to announce that we've used those tools again in our recently revised integrated coastal zone management plan that was endorsed by Parliament in November of last year. And now, this year, we're hoping to deliver our marine spatial plan for our entire ocean space, reinforcing the data coming out of these tools. And so we're simply moving beyond tracking ecosystems, but we're looking at measuring the socioeconomic contributions of natural capital to the economy and well-being. The frameworks for us, we believe, is game-changing, and it's building a centralized framework to turn raw data into investable assets. And so for us, there are three main objectives: unifying our data, and that's to allow us to prove to our partners and our citizens that nature-positive investments are yielding tangible social and ecological results. It allows us to be more successful at adaptive management. And very importantly, it allows us to have trusted, verifiable baselines to now trigger payouts and rewards in our progress in monetizing natural capital in Belize. Finally, I just want to say that in terms of the 3Ps project, it has allowed us to make major steps in bridging the nexus in policy and finance, and it will allow us to create a national dashboard where these KPIs will be accessible to decision makers, policymakers, users at large, and it allows us to have more policy alignment rather than acting in isolated exercises. The 3Ps project has allowed us to be more integrated and to prove to international markets that our natural capital assets are functioning effectively, thereby helping us to de-risk some of the credit gaps that we face within our blue economy, especially within our MSMEs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Now I would like to call to the stage to Director Lormelin Claudio. Director Lormelin Claudio serves as Director 4 of the Ecosystem Research and Development Bureau under the Philippines Department of Environment and Natural Resources, with an extensive career in public service, including prior leadership across multiple regional offices of the Environment Management Bureau of Philippines. In this pilot, Philippines developed a watershed ecosystems account to support the implementation of the 2024 PENCAS Act, establishing a national mandate for natural capital accounting, and the design of an ADB policy-based loan for its institutionalization nationwide. So welcome, Director Lormelin.
Thank you, Hector. Good afternoon, my co-caretakers of the environment and natural resources. Let me share with you the Philippine experience, which demonstrates that transformation occurs when NCA is embedded within existing institutions, the planning systems, and stakeholder processes. Traditional economic indicators, such as the gross domestic product, measure current production and income, but they do not account for the condition, depletion, or enhancement of the natural assets that sustain economic activity. Forests can be cleared, fisheries depleted, watersheds degraded, and biodiversity lost, while economic output may continue to increase in the short term. Yet these changes impose significant long-term costs on societies, economies, and future generations. Natural capital accounting addresses this gap. NCA recognizes ecosystems as productive assets that generate benefits essential to human well-being and economic prosperity. By systematically measuring ecosystem extent, condition, and the services nature provides, NCA makes this contribution visible in planning, policy, and investment decision. In doing so, NCA fundamentally changes how development is understood. It shifts the question from how much economic growth are we generating today to are we maintaining the natural capital that will sustain prosperity in the future. For countries whose economies and communities depend heavily on natural resources, this perspective is particularly important. The Philippines is one such country. The Philippines is among the world's most biodiversity-rich and climate-vulnerable nations, with development pathways deeply intertwined within the health of ecosystems. Watersheds support water security, agriculture, disaster resilience, biodiversity conservation, energy production, and local livelihoods. The country has 2,224 delineated watersheds, and 131 of these are priority watersheds. Many of these directly support irrigation systems, domestic water supply, agriculture, and other economic activities. Because of this, watershed decisions are fundamentally development decisions. Environmental sustainability, food security, water security, disaster resilience, and local livelihoods are inseparable from ecosystem health. NCA, therefore, provides a framework for ensuring that nature is recognized not as an external concern, but as a core component of national wealth and sustainable development. The question for the Philippines was never whether natural capital matters. The real challenge was how to incorporate the value of nature into actual government planning, investment, and decision-making processes. The 3Ps initiative is a global effort led by Stanford University's Natural Capital Project, together with the development partners, including ADB, IDB, and the World Bank. The initiative aims to integrate the value of nature into development policy and investment decision across participating countries. In the Philippines, we are so thankful that ADB and Stanford provided technical assistance to DNR in the form of capacity building. Stanford's Natural Capital Alliance delivered capacity building using the INVEST tool and ecosystem service modeling. That was so helpful for the country. ADB also supported valuation and policy-related capacity development. However, DNR made an important strategic decision. Rather than conducting standalone training activities, the capacity building effort was anchored in an actual government project. This became what we call now the DNR ERDB's Vulnerability Assessment and Natural Capital Accounting Project. The VA-NCA project goal was to determine whether NCA could be integrated into existing government systems. We now have the Santo Tomas Watershed, which becomes a demonstration site for testing how NCA could support real-world watershed management. The VA-NCA project was implemented in Santo Tomas Watershed in Zambales, and it combined watershed characterization and vulnerability assessment, ecosystem accounting concepts, ecosystem service assessment, environmental monitoring, stakeholder engagement, and it generated information on ecosystem condition, vulnerability, carbon, sediment retention, I should say, water-related ecosystem services. But the most important question was not what information could be generated. The more important question was, how can this information influence planning and management decisions? This required moving beyond assessment. It required governance. Information alone does not change outcomes. Institutions and stakeholders do. To support utilization of projects results, DNR convened the stakeholders consultation and action planning workshop 2 weeks ago. And the workshop shifted the discussion from assessment output toward implementation. Stakeholders worked together to validate the project findings, identify priority interventions, and clarify governance rules. Okay. The June workshop is not the end of the process. A follow-up activity is scheduled for September, and the results from the workshop and succeeding engagement will also contribute to a policy brief intended to support future institutionalization. Okay. Now, let me share with you the transition. The experience reinforced an important lesson. NCA implementation cannot be accomplished by a single agency. So we have departments that handle account compilation, policy integration and development planning, and translation of information into local action. The Philippine experience demonstrates that NCA becomes transformational when it moves beyond accounting. It becomes transformational when it strengthens institutions, improves planning, supports governance, enables collaboration, informs investments, and helps translate environmental information into decisions. The Philippines is still early in its NCA journey. However, through PENCAS, the 3Ps, partnerships, the VA-NCA project, and stakeholder-driven implementation efforts, we are beginning to move from assessment toward institutionalization. And ultimately, that is what sustainable development requires, not simply understanding nature, but ensuring that nature is systematically considered in how decisions are made. That is how we could translate the novel concept of sustainable development into practical reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lormelin. Now, finally, I would like to call Dr. Tong Wu. He's a senior scientist here at the Natural Capital Alliance at Stanford University, where he leads China-related initiatives and research focused on mainstreaming biodiversity and ecosystem services into decision-making and economic planning, with a focus on the gross ecosystem product that we're going to hear more in future sessions of the event. For this project, Dr. Tong Wu directed the project of the South Dongting Lake, producing a GEP evaluation of 49 billion yuan that now fits into a dual framework for GDP, GEP performance metrics, and an eco-compensation program that is incentivizing land stewardship and restoration. So welcome, Dr. Wu.
Hector, do you want me to do this in Spanish? Or? Someone asked me what El Nino meant in English once, and I said, I think it means the Nino. So I don't have slides, but I guess I'll just talk until someone stops me. As Hector mentioned, a lot of my work and the work of many others at NatCap is focused on this indicator called gross ecosystem product, which you heard about earlier today from Professor Ouyang, from Professor Steve Plasky. And in this particular project, we worked with our Asia Development Bank colleagues, Narayan, and others to pilot the accounting and with an eye to future application of GEP in South Dongting Lake. Now, Dongting Lake is the second largest freshwater lake in China. It's one of the largest freshwater lakes in Asia. And it's also a major node in the regional flyway, and so the regional flyway initiative is for migratory birds is also another key project of our ADB friends. And so we realized that this particular pilot had very special characteristics, and by innovating the application of GEP here, we could potentially meet several goals at the same time. So Dongting Lake, it's situated in the Yangtze River Basin. And so it's a very crucial watershed for this entire river basin in which more than 400 million people live. But at the same time, Dongting Lake is under a lot of land use pressures. So land use pressures from urbanization. To the south of Dongting Lake, there's a very large urban agglomeration. And to the north, there's a lot of agriculture. And so this is an ecosystem, this is an eco-region that's being kind of pressured from multiple sides and by multiple land development pressures. So we wanted to use GEP as a way to account, to reveal the economic value of this vital ecosystem in order to kind of ward off or potentially channel in different directions some of those land use pressures. One of the key things to note about what our calculations found was that over 60% of South Dongting Lake's GEP is in regulating services. And so this is the regulating services such as climate regulation, flood mitigation, water retention. So many of those functions that make nature a form of infrastructure, as you heard about this morning. And so we were, very interested with that result because, as climate change continues apace, this is going to be one of the areas that's going to see a lot of climate impacts. And so, the value of GEP that GEP is revealing in this particular case is also a form of climate resilience. Your signs don't scare me. But I should say that this GEP project that we did in South Dongting Lake is just one of many applications of GEP across China. As you heard from Professor Ouyang this morning, GEP is being piloted, not piloted, but adopted by cities, by provinces, and increasingly at the national level. And I should say a few words about to demystify what GEP is and it isn't. It's GEP sounds very much like gross domestic product, but it's meant not to be a replacement, but to be a partner or a complement. So whether in South Dongting Lake or elsewhere in China and elsewhere in the world that we're applying GEP, we're doing it as kind of a eco-friendly friend or accomplice to GDP. We're not using it to replace GDP because we think GDP still captures a lot of useful information, but what it leaves out is what we hope to capture with gross ecosystem product. So thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for your presentations and for describing the project in this very brief time. I know it's a big effort to describe all the work that has been done in such a little time. So I'm going to have an even better challenge now. I'm going to ask you to reply very shortly. So let's start with Camilo. Camilo, you wrapped up your presentation with a very interesting graphic that we couldn't read, but it was sort of like a pathway between economic valuation and then financing instruments for biodiversity. And so I would like to follow up a little bit on that. Like, can you go a little bit in more details to tell us how do you go from economic valuation of natural capital to define the structure and the value to pay in the financing instruments that you're considering for Colombia? Please reply in Spanish if you're more comfortable with.
Ok, Héctor, gracias por la pregunta. Pues digamos que yo pienso que el proyecto nos llevó a un punto en Colombia que es básicamente conectar lo que es los servicios ecosistémicos, la valoración económica y el financiamiento. Ese fue, digamos que es el gran aprendizaje que tenemos allí. Desde mi punto de vista y en la reflexión que hemos hecho con todos los del equipo, podemos decir tres cosas principalmente. La primera es que se debe seguir implementando el sistema de contabilidad económica ambiental por diferentes motivos, entre ellos por la robustez metodológica que tiene esta práctica. El segundo es la aplicación de las cadenas lógicas que parte de esos servicios ecosistémicos, su valoración hasta el financiamiento para el reconocimiento del servicio. Las escalas que se deben hacer o en las que se deben hacer estos ejercicios tienen que ser escalas locales, ¿sí? Podemos llamar a nivel de cuenca, porque es donde tenemos una mejor modelación biofísica. Y lo otro es que la política no debe ser o la política que soporta todos estos ejercicios no debe ser de corto plazo, llámese un año o incluso un periodo menos, sino que tenemos que tener una política de medio y de largo plazo que nos permita precisamente reflexionar sobre estos ejercicios, su implementación y que precisamente nos sirva para la toma de decisiones de largo plazo en política pública.
Thank you so much, Camilo. I would like now to follow up with Beverly. Belize sets an example from financing approaches that are linking natural capital evidence with investment commitments through the Blue Bond Initiative. What would be your thoughts in terms of how this model could be adapted to mobilize resources for coastal conservation in other small island or coastal states?
So I believe that the Belizean model is very much scalable. But one of the things that is important is that it has to, one, be based on data, and so that is one of the important areas when you're looking at these results-based financing mechanisms, because at the end of the day, you have to have some way of now tracking the impact that it's having on the ground. And so having that national planning, like Colombia and the other countries are now working on, where goals are set out very clearly in these broader instruments is important. And I think the other thing is to look at to have the needs from a nature and people perspective clearly identified nationally that you can then incorporate into these financing mechanisms at the end of the day to come back and have the real impact on the ground so that we can realize the additionality in conservation that we really need to realize at the end of the day. And so the projects like the 3Ps project and the MRV systems that we're working on allows us to attain a certain level of readiness. And so I think that is something that is easily transferable to small countries. It doesn't have to be complex, but it's to start that system so that you have the basis for incorporation of these targets that are looking at nature and people at the end of the day in these financing mechanisms.
Yeah. Thank you, Beverly. I maybe a quick follow-up with you because, well, you used a word that was very interesting in your presentation. You used the word permanence. And I think that's a feature of what's happening in Belize.
Yeah.
It's a long-term effort.
Yes.
You're setting the example of how institutions need to maintain. And so do you have recommendations also regarding permanence? How do you achieve long-term institutionalization of these efforts?
Right. So one of the things for us with regards to permanence, it's two things, really. It's a start. So we started with our blue bonds. And what we did was to leverage the success of the blue bonds now to complement, to seek additional finance to complement what we're doing with the blue bonds and to look at long-term financing for that. So we started the blue bonds, and then we're looking at a project for finance permanence to strengthen what we're delivering on the blue bond. And now we're looking at outcome-based financing to further strengthen and bring what you're looking for at the end of the day is a sustained financing in the sector that you can only have, in my view, through the combination and complementing instruments that are looking at various aspects that you want financing for. So not just for nature, conservation, but now looking at people, livelihoods. How do we ensure that what we're doing is both nature positive and people positive at the end of the day? And the last thing I'm going to say is that permanence also requires that from an institutional standpoint, we become as integrated as possible and that we ensure that those silos that we have traditionally worked in, whether it's from government or partners, that we now have a more integrated approach to ensure that the systems that we have in place are able to now, in a successful way, implement, track, and to adapt at the end of the day. And when you have that in place, there's more appetite for investment, and there's more appetite for non-traditional financing to come into the realm that you're now working in.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Beverly. Now I would like to ask a question to Director Lormelin. You show this very interesting vision and pathway for the Philippines to implement in this legislative mandate you have through the PENCAS law to advance into national level, national capital accounting, and also integrate this at decision level, like watershed planning, etc. So I would like to ask you, like, what do you think is the most critical element that's still needed, and especially in terms of capacity, to implement this at scale? What's the next step for the Philippines in terms of capacity?
Yeah, thank you, Hector. In the implementation of the VACA project, we found that there is a big gap. Okay. So with that gap, we intend to do more monitoring. Monitoring is crucial. When you say monitoring, you just don't go inspect the areas, but you have to install instrumentations. Instruments are very critical, and of course, data management. For the DNR, the ERDB in particular, the office which I had, we have established already the Artificial Intelligence Knowledge Hub, so that whatever we gather on ground should now be uploaded and analyzed, and of course, for researchers of the DNR to make use of it. Another thing is capacity building. So we would like that the Stanford and the Natural Capital Alliance would still help the Philippines in capacity building, because we are not just capacitating the DNR, the field officers. We will be capacitating the counterparts, the local government units. We try to do that, but our team did that in, as I said, 2 weeks ago. And the stakeholders, the local government units, are so glad that we are reaching them out. And we actually did action planning. So they validated the findings that we have done. And what we will be doing further is that these local officers will have to report that to their principals, meaning the local leaders, so that it would be institutionalized. So after this, after the September workshop that we'll be having, we'll come up with policy brief. And hopefully that would be replicated, not just in Santo Tomas area, but also nationwide, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I have another question for you, but I'll come back to you. Now I would like to ask a question to Dr. Dongwu. Based on your experience in the Dongting Lake with this dual GDP-GEP reporting framework, what institutional arrangement made it possible to embed ecosystem values into the economic performance evaluation? I mean, how can the model be structured for replication across different counties of China?
So the application of GEP has been diverse because in many ways it's a very versatile indicator and a tool. Some of the primary decision-making contexts in which we've seen GEP deployed is, I'll just give 3 broad categories. One is to track performance. So you can track the performance of a certain project, or you can track the performance of a policymaker or administrators. Use that as a KPI, right, to incentivize good behavior. And then the other context is in green finance. And so actually I lied, there's 4 contexts. So the second one is in green finance. So we're experimenting with developing financial mechanisms such as parametric insurance products or GEP-linked bonds. So that's another decision-making context. And then the third one would be in China, we broadly call eco-compensation, but it's very related to payments for ecosystem services. So using GEP as the rubric by which to calibrate the amount and linking the beneficiaries and the suppliers. And then the fourth one is just to use in land use planning, identifying where in the landscape is producing the greatest economic value, and then prioritizing those areas for restoration and protection. Yeah, again, I want to emphasize GEP isn't meant to replace gross domestic product. They're meant to be friends. It's like a buddy cop movie. One's Chris Tucker and one's Jackie Chan. They work together.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're on time for this panel. I would love to stay here talking with you. It's so interesting to hear all the experience on different perspectives. We need to move on to the next part of the session. But I will ask everyone to please a big applause for our panelists today. Thank you for your participation. Of course, I invite everyone in the audience to reach out to our panelists today to learn more about these projects. They are very interesting case applications of natural capital, and you see there is so much else, so much to do, and hopefully they will be interested in starting to align and contribute around this. Well, okay, so now for the panel wrap up, I would like to invite Kim Bonine, the Director of Capacity Development at Natural Capital Alliance, for a quick close session of this event. Well, thank you, Kim. And well, feel free to.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I will be brief because I know I stand between you and coffee. So thank you so much, all of the panelists, for your just wonderful experience and stories, and for sharing all of these great lessons of success and these deep engagements and assessment processes that really illuminated these values of nature and the benefits, and really successfully integrated them into decisions, into policies, into investments. So I just wanted to share kind of 3 takeaways that I wanted to leave you with that draw from this panel, or these 2 panels, as well as some of the things we heard earlier today. Just the first is that policy impact and impact on investments is happening now. We have all of these concrete examples and stories of success, of how natural capital approaches, how these assessments are positively impacting environmental and social policies, from land use planning, zoning, biodiversity, compensation, infrastructure development, national accounting. And so we're figuring out how to do this, and we're figuring out how to do this well. And I would say there's kind of, what we've learned is that it needs to be the right information at the right time to the right people. And that's all really important, and I think all of what we've heard has really laid out the importance of that. And so the right information, there's a lot of aspects of that, from mapping to scenarios to feasibility analysis, really understanding who is benefiting from what and where, and how might that change with a decision or a policy. Who wins, who loses, how do we look at those trade-offs? And then the right time. I think it's a thread we've heard again and again, is the right time is early, 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 and it's upstream. It's early in the planning process. I think the idea of nature as infrastructure. If we have a development goal and we ask ourselves how might we best reach that goal, and we bring nature into the process at the outset, we can find better ways to reach those development goals. When we wait until later, it's often then very difficult to figure out how to address issues related to impacts on nature. And then the right people, I think this is one of the most exciting pieces that we've seen throughout today, is this idea of these integrated, cross-ministerial, transversal teams that were a fundamental part of these engagements and really fundamental to their success. And if anything, what we learned through the past couple of years is that this is about relationships, and this is about building trust. And oftentimes we move at the speed of trust. And the time, effort that it takes to build relationships is just as much as it takes to gather data and run analyses and models. So building relationships and trust is absolutely fundamental to the success of what we are all trying to do and the change we're trying to create in the world. The other thing we've seen, kind of the second big point, is how we translate economic value into financial flows. So identifying that something has economic value, meaning social benefits, human well-being, human welfare, does not mean money starts falling from the sky. So economic value is not the same as cash flow. Those are very different. So how do we translate value into finance, into ways to pay for things? And that's a theme that has come up again and again. And there's a lot of different innovations happening, a lot of exciting work being done and still to be done. But I also love the emphasis on, just as much as we need to think outside the box about these different ways of financing nature, we can't forget about the box, because what's in the box is also really important. Some of those basic domestic budgets, things that we already know how to do, and to make sure that we don't get distracted by all the shiny new objects. And I think also, as part of that box, holding the burden of proof of economic feasibility of development, the same as we are taking on that burden of proof for nature stewardship. And then the other piece I wanted to emphasize is, and that we've heard throughout today, is replicating, expanding, and scaling. And this idea that how can we replicate this easier and faster? How can we scale? And I think one of the ways we've seen is back to learning each other's languages, creating these sort of cross-sectoral teams and institutional guidance and mechanisms and frameworks. So if we create a common language, and I spent 20 years, over 20 years, teaching economics to environmental professionals, when we can start talking to each other, we start talking with each other instead of past each other. And so that's really key. And so there are many ways in which all of our institutions and organizations are working towards how do we share more effectively, how do we build capacity. We've heard talk about the MOOC that Stanford NatCap and IDB has just launched, and that was an incredible collaborative effort of co-development, of also learning each other's language, ecologists, economics, development banks, learning how to talk to one another and share out this information, along with the implementation toolkit of just really practical guidance of how can we really replicate this. And then another idea that we wanted to share with you that we want to kind of hear your feedback throughout the coming days is this idea of a natural capital country champions network. We want to keep this momentum going. All of you are champions. You're doing this incredible work, and we want to help facilitate you continuing to share this with other people, with other countries. And so it's kind of a light touch idea that we'll continue to discuss with you throughout these coming days, and please reach out to me about it. So just in summary, you all are here, you all are already listening, you're leading, you are diplomats and ambassadors. We know natural capital approaches work, and we know how to do them. We are growing the ways in which we can create financial flows for nature, and we need to keep the momentum going. We need to scale, and we need to share experiences and capacity, not just in how to do assessments, but how to institutionalize these processes. So we're so excited to have you all here over the coming days, and we hope we can continue these conversations and keep, as I said, let's keep the momentum going. So thank you all. Enjoy your coffee break.